Hi, nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you too. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Sorry about that. Just trying to make sure everything was good on my end.
It's okay. So, it's nice to see you. Welcome to Reset Revolution. I'm Justina, and today we'll be talking about grassroots advocacy and policy reform for food justice in the US. So that was a mouthful, but could you just start by introducing yourself, maybe giving a bit of background on where you're from, what you're doing right now?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me to talk about what honestly does sound like a mouthful when you say it. My name's Max Sano. I'm from New York, in the United States. I studied environmental studies and government at Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania, in a very robust farming community. And now I'm studying food studies with an emphasis on policy and advocacy at NYU.
Mhm.
And I'm just very interested in the intersection of labor politics and food justice, considering the way in which the U.S. Structures its agricultural system. And I'm just looking forward to unpacking these ideas with you.
Mhm. So first of all, since we're talking about grassroots advocacy and policy reform, how would you describe the relationship between these two sides? Is it more that grassroots advocacy can help policy reform, or is there more of a tense relationship between the two sides?
I think it depends on who the stakeholders are. Um, it's something that I've grappled with, thinking about how coalitions form and how they can be co-opted at times by the same forces that we are trying to, or that the coalition is trying to check on their power. So, for example, there was a bill that just passed both the House and the Senate recently called the Food Donation Improvement Act, and it would clarify language around legal liability for who can donate food
Mhm.
to food hubs in the US. And there were a lot of concerns by big retailers, by organizations like Grubhub, like a food delivery service, Weight Watchers, um, big corporations that were interested in donating food and wanted to save money that they would have been losing to food waste. But there are also grassroots activists that have been trying to better um, support the farming community and make sure that food that they're growing doesn't go to waste because of fear of being sued in case someone that ate the food gets sick. And
Mhm.
so, even though this bill had the support of both corporations and of uh, grassroots elements within different communities, um, some people might view that as it not really being a worthy bill in the first place, because, oh, if corporations are interested in it, then maybe there's something uh, wrong with it. At least that's something that I know other people that I've talked to about this issue might have fear about. But um, unfortunately, there's a lot of lobbying power that some of these corporations have, and so they're able to open the door and shape and help leave room for the dialogue to be shaped then by nonprofits and research groups that have uh, seen the cost benefit analysis of what this would mean, saving hundreds of billions of dollars in food waste, but also um, allowing schools to donate their food, allowing restaurants to donate their food. Um, and it was a bipartisan bill that both Democrats and Republicans were able to agree on. And it's interesting because it was able to bring people from the left and the right in the US to a common ground on food policy, which is very rare for any policy, but especially for food systems. So
And you've talked about food waste, but what other issues are there surrounding food justice in the US that you think grassroots advocates and also policymakers are trying to solve? Like, I know that food aid and also problems like having food deserts is a big issue in the US. So, what do you think the most pressing problems are?
I think that the COVID-19 pandemic really shined a light on uh, who we rely on for the majority of our agricultural products. And in the United States, that is the immigrant and permanent resident communities in the United States. Uh, the U.S. Labor Department has pointed out that roughly 49% of agricultural workers in the U.S. are undocumented immigrants with minimal legal rights as well as workforce like standards. And if you consider immigrants that do hold legal status, including green cards and permanent residents, the total number of our agricultural force is 73% of these communities. And it's just troubling when you think about how immigration politics in the US, as well as in Europe, as I'm sure you know, gets vilified. And it's a matter of what can immigrants bring back to society that then makes them worthwhile being in Western countries. And so it's something that I've been thinking about and trying to follow policies, both federally, but also at state levels in the United States. And there was one bill that is of note called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And essentially, it would allow for a pathway for citizenship for immigrants that either don't have green card or permanent resident status. They would be able to apply for every 5 years, they'd be able to apply and renew their legal status if they can prove that they've worked in agriculture for at least 180 days or half a year over the past 2 years. And this would apply to the families of these workers as well. And this is a legislation that passed this year in the House, but in the Senate, it's a different situation. They've proposed a compromise bill that has not passed or been put to a vote yet, called the Affordable and Secure Food Act. And already there's tons of differences, such as you can only apply once you've worked or proven you could work after 10 years being in that industry. And the visas themselves would only last for 1 year at a time, and you'd have to renew every year. So it would just put a lot more pressure on these communities that the American food system relies on, considering the aging farming population as well as less and less people wanting to work in agriculture. And so these are the types of discourse that is happening right now in the US over the last few months, or at least the last year. And I think it's a really important topic that might not really be thought about because, of course, food deserts are an essential component of the distribution problem in our country. But I've been trying to think a little bit more about the labor implications of food justice, because sometimes we think of labor politics as, Amazon and big like Starbucks, or like, at least in the US context, like more on like the consumer facing side, but we forget what it takes to actually produce our food, like from a production standpoint. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of these people don't have any legal recourse or rights to be able to speak their side in a court of law. So,
Yeah.
something I think about, yeah.
And speaking of labor rights, are there significant issues that you know of to do with working conditions for these immigrant laborers in the U.S.?
Yes, so the Green Zine, which is the organization that you can see that I'm speaking from, is a platform I started so that youth, anyone 30 years and under, can write about issues important to them regarding environmental justice, environmentalism, climate change. And we focus on the some of the issues that I've brought up and other ones as well. So, for example, a contributor over the summer wrote about the work conditions at industrial farms in the U.S., especially the pork industry. A lot of these meat processors and just meat facilities had very limited health protections during the pandemic and did not care what happened to their employees, as well as the surrounding communities, which tend to be predominantly Black and Indigenous people of color. And it just manifests into so many other issues of environmental justice stemming from air pollution to access of economic um, mobility and just a lot of other factors that you don't normally just associate with the food system. Um, and yeah, I mean, some of the, so, like that's an article, for example, that focuses on some of these labor issues in the food system, but there's also um, a lot of opportunity to combine technology with environmental justice. So a group in what is known as North Dakota today, an indigenous nation called the Shangu Lakota, have been able to access controlled environment agriculture facility, so indoor farming. It's called a geodesic dome, and it allows for food, culturally appropriate food, to be grown year round, regardless of the local weather conditions. And as climate change like affects local climates throughout the country, that type of technology, if given proper access to groups that have been historically marginalized, could be a big game changer.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And you've touched on your organization, the Green Zine. Could you talk a bit more about that and your involvement in grassroots advocacy for food justice?
Absolutely. I I started the Green Zine in the fall of 2020, right as students were coming back to campus in a hybrid setting, and we weren't sure how to engage with students that were also online or, were overseas. And so I was trying to think of a way to amplify. And I think there's a lot of imposter syndrome that young people feel in terms of, oh, can I contribute to the discourse I see on the news? Is my writing up to the standards of other people reading it? Like a lot of these questions that I've faced as well. And the Green Zine is meant to be like an editing or a publishing and mentoring platform. So if you have an idea, maybe you wrote an article in class or are doing research with a professor, but you want to speak more about what it means to you. That's sort of how it started,
Mhm.
trying to encourage other students in my college. And then it blossomed into just high school students, college students, recently graduated students just starting to write stories, podcasts, contribute other forms of media around environmental issues. And this is this is something that, at least in terms of grassroots advocacy, I attempted to do when I was at my undergrad, was to create a sustainable food systems minor within the environmental studies department at my college, because I thought it was insane that we're in the middle of agriculture city, like big Amish community, a lot of sustainably run farms, a lot of even uh, big ag facilities and land around the county, and yet there's no way for students to actually learn what those practices look like.
Mhm.
And I worked with some professors and other students to create a proposal that would require students in that minor to work in some aspect of the food system, be it at the farmer's market, be it on the farm itself with a food uh, rescue organization that donates food to the community. Um, and it just made me think about the ways that, kind of goes back to our conversation of the tension between grassroots advocacy and policy reform. Um, this was happening in the context of a higher education institution, one that has not always been very um, supportive of social justice or racial justice issues, and yet we were able to, because of the people within that institution, uh, and because of the community that the broader community's needs, we were able to come up with a proposal that not only provided learning opportunities for students, but also supported the or would support the agricultural community with any potential labor that they might need from students that, for better or worse, I guess, are willing to do free internships or free work, um, if it means they could put it on their resume.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I agree that it's really interesting that something like as broad a topic as sustainable food systems isn't offered. Um, yeah, I think a lot of the time we're so desensitized to these kinds of problems because we're just, on the consumer end, we're not faced with the issues to do with production of food, even if it's happening like right in the countryside outside of our cities. So, yeah. What do you think can be done by people like us, young people? How do you think we can raise awareness and directly contribute to improving the food production system?
Yeah, it's you're asking one of those questions that I try to think about a lot of the time. It's a lot easier to have these conversations, in the comfort and safety of our homes rather than, you know, trying to figure out which policy or that is more comprehensive um, to realizing a more just food system. And uh, I think at least in the United States, it's frustrating because you can pass policies state by state, or you can pass it, in the federal government. And um, as I mentioned with the previous federal bills, it can really water down the type of work that you're trying to do. But California was actually able to pass what was called the Agricultural Labor Relations Voting Choice Act, which would expand union rights for farm workers, for migrant farm workers particularly, so that they can vote for or against union representation in mail-in ballot rather than just it being in person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that would be very important in terms of preventing any voter intimidation at these union drives, which is very common in unionization drives throughout the U.S. Um, and this wouldn't have been possible without a months-long farm worker march that was organized by United Farm Workers Union and amplified by food justice influencers that are part of the migrant community, such as Flour in Spanish. Um, for months, like thousands of farm workers marched 355 miles, like 9 to 11 miles a day across numerous towns from north to south, or sorry, from south to north, California, I believe. And they ultimately demonstrated in front of the state capitol to pressure the governor into signing the bill into law, because even though it had passed uh, in the state legislature or the state assembly, um, he was Gavin Newsom, the governor, was dragging his feet on whether or not he was going to sign the bill. And so students actually of all ages, high school students, passed out water bottles to the protesters as they walked down. Medical students were providing any needed, medical attention to farm worker protesters that, might have been facing heat stroke or any other health conditions because of the nature of the walk. Um, and just joining in the walk for periods of time itself, like just showing solidarity with people that we rely on for the food that we eat and for the world to eat as well, since a lot of food that produced in the United States also gets exported to other countries. Students can play a role in that way if they, you know, it's hard because you don't know who to follow, you don't know what part of the protest or the effort that you're joining in. But I think just showing up when you can find a policy
Mm-hmm.
solution like this is really important. Just staying aware and trying to follow organizations such as United Farm Workers, a growing culture, Flour in Spanish. There's a lot of organizations that are directly involved with food justice advocacy, specifically from the immigrant perspective as well. So, yeah,
Yeah, show that demonstrations and protests can actually have a really direct impact on law and policies that are passed. So, yeah, I think it's,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. And I think the things you've said are very insightful and hopefully to those who are watching, inspirational, giving us a little motivation to learn more and take more action to do with food justice. So thank you so much for your participation.
Yeah, and thank you for joining in. If anyone's interested, you can always reach out to the Instagram or the email, I believe that's in our bio. If you want to write a story or just interested in learning more about food issues, you can always reach out. So thank you again for making the time.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.